GoForThe2.com. I'm continuing with my MAACO Las Vegas Bowl preview and prediction. It's Saturday, December 22nd. It's a 3:30 start. It's on ESPN. It's an intriguing matchup between the Pac-12 Conference and the Mountain West Conference. You have 7-5 Washington taking on the 10-2 Boise State Broncos. I'm going to give you my news and notes about both teams. I'm also going to give you my prediction a little bit later in the podcast. Let's take Washington right now. They're 7-5 overall. They won 4 of 5 to end the season to make them bowl eligible. Steve Sarkisian and his staff have 3 weeks to prepare for this matchup. In the beginning of the year, they had a very young, inexperienced offensive line that led to some of their offensive woes. When you look at Washington, they're only averaging 23.8 points per game. They're 87th in the country in passing, 92nd in the country in rushing. That was due to a very young, inexperienced offensive line that started 2 sophomores at the tackle position. When you look at their quarterback, he's a very explosive player, having a very subpar season. That's quarterback Keith Price. He's only completed 61% of his passes, threw for 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, but he was sacked 33 times on the season. He was sacked and he was hurried earlier in the season. As the offensive line gained continuity and experience, he gelled, and that's why that offense gelled later in the season to pick up 4 out of 5 victories on the year. When you look at the Washington team in general, they do have 3 quality wins over quality bowl opponents. It's San Diego State, Stanford, and at the time previously undefeated Oregon State. All of those victories came at home. All of those victories, though, were good quality wins. They knocked off San Diego State 21-12 to start the season. They knocked off Stanford 17-13 on a Thursday night at home. And then they knocked off Oregon State 20-17 to hand the Beavers their first loss on the season. So good quality opponents, good quality victories for the Washington Huskies. Offensively, at the running back position, they do have a stud at the running back position in Bishop Sankey. He's carried that offense. He has 1,234 yards on the season rushing. He added 15 touchdowns. He's taken a lot of the pressure off of that young, inexperienced offensive line and opened up the play-action passing game later in the season when the Huskies won 4 of 5. When you look at Washington in terms of their passing game, they have a very good tight end in Safron Jenkins. He's had over 700 yards receiving. They do also have a big play wide receiver who's a sophomore as well. He's Williams. He has over 700 yards receiving as well. As the offensive line later in the year gained experience, Steve Sarkisian and the offense did take more chances. So they do now, for this bowl game, have another 3 weeks to prepare, and I think that's a positive heading into this matchup for Washington. I like the way the offense has shown the way they can move the ball later in the year, and I think the 3-week layoff will help the offensive coaching staff game plan heading into this matchup with Boise State. When you look at the defense for Washington, they have a very good pass secondary, only giving up 188 yards per game in the Pac-12. That's very good considering the type of talent that you have in the Pac-12 in terms of quarterbacks. They only gave up 188 yards per game overall, and it's going to be a tough task for Boise State and quarterback Joe Southwick, in my opinion, to move the ball on the Washington defense. When you look at Washington, very opportunistic in terms of turnover margin. They're a +7 overall and a +2 on the road. So that's what kept them into bowl games. That defense, in their ability to defend in the Pac-12 against the pass, has made up for the lack of explosive offensive firepower. So that's a key matchup heading into this bowl game against Boise State in this bowl game. Let's talk about Boise State right now. They did play in this bowl game last year. They blew out Arizona State with Kellen Moore at the quarterback position and running back Doug Martin at the time, both seniors. That was their last senior game. They went off in style. They had big games in the blowout victory last year against Arizona State. So Boise State is familiar with the landscape of Las Vegas. They understand the facilities. That's a positive heading into this matchup, that they do know how to prepare for Las Vegas. head coach Chris Peterson. His offense struggled a little bit when you think about Boise State only averaging 30.8 points per game. That's well below the average last year for the Broncos. Coming back with a first-year starter and quarterback Joe Southwick. He's a junior. He's completed 66.7% of his passes, only 17 touchdowns, 7 INTs on the year, but a very good offensive line in front of Southwick. He's only been sacked 6 times total on the year, so that's a positive as well. They're more of a run-heavy offense this year than they were in years past. Senior DJ Harper, he has 1,065 yards on the season, 15 touchdowns. He's their first option in terms of the offense. Chris Peterson and the offensive staff like to use DJ Harper first and then work off a play action with Southwick. They like to build his confidence into games. They don't like to take a lot of chances with Joe Southwick at the helm right now. So it's a different offense for the Boise State Broncos than in years past. They're 80th in the country in terms of passing, 52nd in the country in rushing. When you look at the strength of the Boise State Broncos, it's their defense, only giving up 14.9 points per game. That's 6th in the country. And the way they create turnovers is unimaginable. They're plus 18 in turnover margin on the year, a plus 13 on the road. So that's what's kept Boise State to 10-2 this year. To make up for the lack of offensive talent has been their defense. They've stepped up. They've created turnovers on the road, and they're opportunistic. So that's why Boise State is 10-2. When you look at both of their losses have come to quality opponents. Both bowl opponents, Michigan State to open the year 17-13, and then they lost to San Diego State 21-19. So that's a common opponent for both teams is San Diego State. Washington beat them to start the year at home. Boise State lost to them 21-19. So how does that match up heading into this bowl game? When you look at Boise State's resume, they played a very soft, mediocre Mountain West Conference opponent record. Their only loss coming to San Diego State. And when you look at their quality win, they only really have one quality win that's over BYU. That was at home. They picked up a 7-6 victory. But when you look at that matchup, BYU did score late in that ball game. They scored the touchdown. They opted to go for the 2-point conversion on the road and failed. And that's how Boise State escaped with the 7-6 victory at home. So not a very stellar victory, in my opinion, over the BYU Cougars. Riley Nelson in that ball game threw 3 INTs. Freshman at the time, Taysom Hill, came in. He led them to their only touchdown. So how does that fare heading up against a very experienced quarterback in Keith Price? I think when you look at this matchup, I like Washington in this ball game. I like the way Washington developed later in the year. I like Steve Sarkisian and the fact that he has 3 weeks to prepare for this ball game, and I think the defensive secondary for Washington is the difference. I like Washington to pick up a 28-21 victory in this ball game. I just think Washington has better quality opponents, played a tougher schedule to date, and I like the physicality on defense for Washington heading into this matchup. I think Washington picks up a 28-21 victory in the Las Vegas Bowl. Stay with me all week long. We have another week of bowl matchups ahead of us. I'm going to give you my podcast. I'm also going to lead up to the BCS National Championship game. Take a look at the rest of the week's picks in terms of the bowl games that I did not give podcasts to. They will be available under the NCAA pick section Thursday morning at GoForThe2.com.